today I decided to talk about reconciling knowing, especially as it relates to education. If we're talking about education, what is important in education? We learn about history, but we learn about history from a Canadian perspective, as opposed to history from an Indigenous perspective. We as an Indigenous people have emerged as a part of the world. And it's that deep recognition that we have about our relationships to one another that drives the fundamental way that we see the world. As Indigenous people, we're natural systems thinkers. We think in transformation. We act and engage with the world as a part of, as opposed to lording over. Even our definitions of education, our definitions of knowing is different. When the newcomers first came into this society, there's a thought that it's not true unless it's been proven, except all the methodology that allows you to prove knowing within mainstream society is limited by the tools that you use to know. So quarks and quantum physics didn't exist prior to somebody advancing it beyond an electron and a neutron and all of those kinds of things. It was not real to this society because it was not provable. Yet, that theory of quantum physics is a fundamental way that Indigenous people think about the world. That's part of our relationships to one another. And we knew that. But if you were to say it, you're questioned. So then somebody said to me, it's okay. They only know what they can see. But we're spiritual beings. We're feeling beings. We exist in the world beside us. This is a time and a place. Now we know that there are other realms, when you're getting into calculus and math, it's 2D, 3D, 4D, XD. And as Indigenous people, when we talk about transformation, our creation stories we emerge after the Great Flood, which is an interesting thing because that's static through all the beings across the earth, all the people across the earth. So we emerge from the flood, but we emerge from the flood as a different being. So my name is Quinwatagalish and Chumsitazu. Quinwatagalish is a thunderbird in the house, which is the spiritual being that comes down and sort of layers the people with their gifts. So it's a supernatural being. The other name that I have, which was when I was younger, is Tlamsitazu, that sparks from the fire. And I thought that was really interesting because I'm always, in my profession and in my life, I'm always questioning and thinking about new things. There's a phrase that we use within our own culture that talks about seeing. Seeing, but it's not seeing in the English language. It's seeing and knowing in our language. And it's kind of about the capacity to transfer between the realms. The only reason why I learned this was because my background is science. So I'm an Indigenous woman that comes from the reserve, that understands our way of being, that ended up transplanted into a predominantly white society that had completely different values and beliefs and ways of being. Furthermore, then I ended up in the educational institution, and it is an institution, that taught me what is true and what is not true. Because knowing is whether it's true or not. It's what you have to prove, right? And so I would always get into trouble in my classes because I'd always say, yeah, but what about... And then finally I was able to connect with some people that were both again, scientists and people that lived in the spiritual world within our own cultures. And that's where I was able to figure out how do we exist in this society as two beings. And those are really important concepts because when we're thinking about reconciliation, we're thinking about relationships. And if we understand that what you do, whether intentional or not, every action has an equal and opposite reaction, right? When you move, when you speak, when you engage with somebody, your words, your thoughts, your presence has impact. You know, on the days when you wake up and it's like, oh man, this is such a good day, I can't wait. I got a good sleep and I got a good breakfast and I'm right on track with all what I have to do. And you walk in and you're in the office and you're like, good morning, everybody, how you doing? And, you know, having lots of fun, laughing around. That translates into whoever you're working with, which you may never know. They may go out and interact with somebody else, and it translates into their way of being. But I could walk into a place and say those exact same words and have it experienced very, very differently based on my own energy that I have. And so I think when we're talking about reconciliation, when we talk about nasnamuyut, all of you who are one with me, there's a consciousness that we have to engage in when we do that. And so at reconciliation, when we're talking about building relationships, meaningful relationships, it's about having the courage to be open, to share my knowing, to share my truths, my experience in a Canadian society that devalues Indigenous people, that devalues women, that devalues somebody who's queer, that devalues all of these things that I am as a human being. And then I'm engaging with all of these CEOs and presidents and mayors and all of these other people who are typically what? They're not Indigenous. They're generally not women. They're generally not queer. They're all of these cultural differences that come through. And somehow, it's my responsibility to translate the information so that it's understandable to them, as opposed to engaging in what I think about diversity and equity is trying to have a shared understanding. A relationship is a conversation between two people. And what we know about one another is what's important. Being able to ask the difficult questions. So on the one hand, me as an Indigenous woman, I am, as the introduction said, I'm the eldest daughter of a hereditary chief, Quinquin Kuligedze Wakias. I am the Utma of his family line, which means I am the head woman. I am like the mother of the family line. And on my mother's side, Matmadi, I hold the rights to a chieftainship within her own lines. And so in that way, I know exactly who I am, and I know that I'm responsible, and I know that I belong. That's me in one world. On the other hand, I'm an Indigenous woman, which means the first thing I heard was about being a heathen, about being less than, about trying to hide every part of that person so that I don't get ostracized or hurt when I'm in the mainstream society. It means that I've experienced physical violence, sexual violence. My mother had 14 brothers and sisters. 11 of them were dead before they were 30 years old. One of them, who we actually engaged with the police on, was part of the Picton case. And we told them 5 years before that was the last place. Everybody knew, but we weren't believed because we couldn't prove it. So the words that we use and the ideas that we have that form the foundations of our knowing can sometimes limit what it is we're able to understand. And I think that's the third value of reconciliation, is we're here to understand one another. Everybody thinks, oh, you guys think reconciliation is about like all of these things and we're gonna have I always say, we're not gonna have a kumbaya kind of state, It's just about me not judging you for the way you think, the way you believe, the way you act, the way you interact. So the other place that I wanted to speak about is about wealth. Because we oftentimes talk about, and this is one of the fundamental differences, this is a fundamental difference in the way that we experience the world, and the way that we experience our responsibilities within that world. Namuyu. Gela Kesla. Greetings, thank you, those words, that word is one word that means many things. Namuyut. To all of you who are one with me. That means who's here, our ancestors, everything that's around us, and our future. So when we're going through these stages, and we begin to understand what those words actually mean, and we think about, for instance, wealth. How do you define wealth? What is wealth to you? And how is wealth acted out and reacted to within the mainstream society? Right? Them with the most toys wins. How much money you have in the bank determines how wealthy you are. We talk about intergenerational wealth. We're so wealthy we can pass that money on to the next generations. For Indigenous people, this is the hard part about doing this. For Indigenous people, wealth is about how much you've given away. It's the complete opposite. It's how much you've been able to contribute to society as a part of your responsibility as a leader. So, if you think about leadership, we have to think about leadership in a mainstream society where the CEO is sort of the king of the hill, right? The president, the mayor, whoever, they're the king of the hill. In our culture, a chief is the one that upholds the people. That's the fundamental difference between us and the way that we experience and transform societies. Do I expect you to behave in this way all of the time? No. We have our traditions and you have your traditions. What we are asking when we're talking about knowing and we're talking about reconciliation is to keep that open mind. Not to be right or wrong, but to understand how a person comes into this world. And that's especially true in this country. How many people here have heard about reconciliation in Canada? How many of you know who paid for the Reconciliation Commission here in Canada? The survivors did. Government didn't pay for it. It's the only reconciliation commission in the world that the people that took the largest class action in the history of this country and won. So with the decision, they said, we want this much to go to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Because we all know the stories. We all know it to be true. We all live it every single day. Doesn't matter whether I'm a CEO or whether I'm somebody who does the cooking in the place or who helps with the cleaning. We live it every single day. And we need to begin to recognize our responsibility in all of that. We have a society or a place where we're asking for people to reconcile and build meaningful relationships between Indigenous people and the rest of Canada. How can we build a meaningful relationship if people in this country who benefited from all of this don't know that fundamental truth? It's the only reconciliation commission in the world that was court mandated, court oversight, and was funded by the victims. It's the only reconciliation commission in the world that involved the violation of the human rights of children. And so how many of you knew that? So how do you know reconciliation? There are some things when we talk about knowing and we talk about understanding, we knew about the children. Our parents and our friends would talk about it. My friend, this was what happened to them. All that we experience is that intergenerational trauma. It impacts how we show up today. The easiest way for me to explain it is which way is the right way for the toilet paper to go on the roll? It's only one way, right? Your families will turn it around and, it's like there's one way. Depends on whether you have an animal or you don't have an animal. Whatever your justification is, there's always a right way and a wrong way. It's as simple as that. The cultures that exist, whether you're in education, whether you're in health, whether you're in business, whether you're in law, they're all different cultures that have recognized social norms that help them to function. What we ask for in Reconciliation Canada is to look at what brought us here. What brought us here? How is it that you, the number of people here, came into this room on this day? What were all of the things that led you to this place? And how have you shown up here? And when you came into this space, did you decide how you wanted to interact with the people around you, to be intentional about our relationship? And so reconciliation to me is not really a checkbox. It's about more than land acknowledgements. It's definitely not about apologies. It's not about money. It's about dignity. The survivors said, I want to do this. They didn't do it for them, because I never want my children or my grandchildren to walk down the street and not be treated with dignity. We all love our children. We all know we have a responsibility to them. And our children are your children, are your children, are your children. And we have a responsibility to everyone. And that, to me, is Gaelic Kessler. Greetings. Greetings. If you underlie what that means, it means I love you. I'm so glad you're here. Your presence is important. I need you to step forward to be your best self in this day, to help transform this place into a place where all of us belong, where all of us have a responsibility, and where all of us are working together with our unique gifts. We're weaving those gifts together to create something to lift the people up more than we ever have before. That, to me, is reconciliation. And that, to me, is how we embark on knowing, being intentional about how we want to enter this world and enter into relationship with you. That's the other word that we have when we finish talking. It's so funny when my dad does this. It's he'em. That's it. I'm out.